Welcome to Out with Dan, the podcast that spotlights and examines the voices of LGBTQ+ authors, characters, and our allies. Together, we lift our voices and we tell our stories. I'm Dan White. Join me as I chat with this week's author. Hello and welcome back to Out with Dan. Today I'm excited to talk to Mark Greaney again. This time it's about his latest book, The Hard Line. Welcome, Mark.
Hi there. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. So I loved this book, and I might have loved it more than the last one, and I loved the last one as well.
That's great to hear.
Yes. Oh, good. So give the audience an overview of what The Hard Line is about.
Yeah, so it's about my returning character. His name is Court Gentry, and he's known as the Gray Man. He's a former CIA officer who, over the course of 15 books, I should start by saying you don't have to read the first 14 to read this one. That would be a big ask. But you, in this one, he's a former CIA officer, but he's working for kind of a private organization called Ghost Town, who takes their directives directly from the head of CIA operations. And right when they start working, they realize that there is an infiltrator in the US government who is leaking secrets. And they've brought the bad guys have brought in some assassins from abroad. And one of the 5 assassins who are there in the DC area killing intelligence professionals is a former Northern Irish hitman named Campbell Coyle, who goes by the call sign Whetstone. And Whetstone has a very personal reason for targeting Court Gentry personally. So he's come to America just to get his hands around Court's neck. So there's kind of these 2 apex predators in the middle of this larger conspiracy going toe to toe. That's kind of at the heart of this book.
Well, when I was first reading Campbell, I really felt like if he could be Court's equal, he was, or pretty darn close to it. So I felt that you crafted a wonderful adversary in him. And I felt like I knew him, probably because I feel like he is similar to Court in his determination and what he feels like is right and what he feels like is wrong.
Yeah.
Was he a fun character to create, or has he been playing around in your mind for a while, or?
He was very fun to create. He has been playing around in my mind in that for years. I've always told my editor someday I wanted to write a Gray Man story where something that the Gray Man did comes back to haunt him. Some little thing that happens in another book that you don't even think about. I think the way I described it to my editor is Court is running somewhere and he pushes a henchman off the cliff to get to the real big bad guy. And something about throwing that guy off the cliff is what comes back to haunt him. So that's not exactly how it plays out in the story. No. but the idea was that, something that seems somewhat trivial, in his life, wouldn't in ours, comes back to haunt him. And so Campbell Coyle, as I wrote him, I thought of all the villains I've written in any of my Gray Man books or Tom Clancy books or any of the other thrillers I've written, 27 in all. I don't think I've had a character that I think that the readers will identify with as much as him, who's a villain. You don't root for him, but you understand where he's coming from. And I thought that was an interesting way to write him.
I agree. And so I won't give away the spoiler of why he's after Court, but I didn't even realize Court was in that first setup.
Yeah.
You wrote it so beautifully, Mark, in the fact that we know that there's an American involved, but we the reader don't know who that American is. Probably if I was a better reader or more astute, I might have guessed. I don't know. But anyway, it really didn't occur to me because it was so well crafted. And in this book, and you're right, you don't have to have read any of the ones before to pick up this one and to get started on it and to enjoy it. But there are things that had happened in past books that are mentioned as sort of an aside. But if you've read some of the other books, you will understand what they're talking about. And I thought you did that so well. I did really feel like I knew Campbell Coyle straight off the bat. I mean, he was so well formed. And so he's from Northern Ireland. And Are you Irish?
Well, I mean, my heritage is Irish. I'd never been to Ireland until I was doing research on a Gray Man book about 15 years ago. And then I did go back for this one to Northern Ireland and do research there
Oh, good.
into the area where Campbell Coyle lives, and also up in Belfast. So I got to spend some time in Northern Ireland for the first time in my life and really enjoyed it.
I've not been to Northern Ireland. I've been to England a few times, but I haven't been to Ireland. And it is on my list of places, destinations I would like to go to. I will say, though, that it was, you know, for a lot of Irish people who live in Northern Ireland, they don't believe they are ruled by England, or they don't want to be ruled by England. And I thought you did handle that so delicately, and yet at the same time you reminded us what I remember from my childhood, the IRA and the fighting and stuff that had gone on in Northern Ireland before. And I thought you did such a masterful job with that.
Thank you so much. It's I had studied it in high school and in college. I got my bachelor's in international relations, and I just like to read a lot about terrorism in general. And I did a lot of travel when I was younger, and I didn't really remember super details. So I did a ton of research all this time last year. I was doing research on the IRA and the history of the Troubles. And then when I went over there, I went to South Armagh, which is kind of it was sort of ground zero during the Troubles. The British couldn't go there unless they were in armored vehicles. And that's where Campbell Coyle, my character, is living at the beginning of this book. And so I went there and I rented a farmhouse, and it was just as beautiful a place as you can imagine, as peaceful a place. The people were very, very nice, but there was also pro-Republican IRA graffiti on the walls you would see in places. There were like very ornate murals, depicting fallen IRA soldiers or terrorists, depending on, I guess, what side you were on. And this book is not about the IRA, so it doesn't really it doesn't delve into it, although it does delve into the pasts and the histories of the characters. And
Right.
So I really felt like before I could place a character in that location and have him part of that heritage, I had to kind of dig into it a little bit.
And I know that you spent time in Central America. Have you ever been to Nicaragua?
I had been to Nicaragua briefly, yeah, and El Salvador and Honduras, and mostly I was in Guatemala when I was there, but a little bit of time in Nicaragua. And what I used in the book, it was mostly maps and things, maps and videos and things like that. I've never been to that actual region, but you get pretty adept in this. I've never been to North Korea, but I've written about it, so I'm trying to adopt places in Hong Kong that I say, okay, it's probably not exactly like this, but you kind of like try to dial in on an area.
Well, and I do know, having been to Costa Rica, landing in San Jose and going to Puerto Limon, you go through a rainforest. And I remember it was just so different. That was the first time I'd been in a rainforest. Mm-hmm. So, to describe it once I got back to Miami was so much fun for me, because I'm like, I had never seen something so magical like that, because I'd always lived in a more arid, temperate climate than that. But I love the descriptions of Nicaragua, because I do realize it's quite a bit of jungle there.
It is. I lived in Guatemala for a while studying Spanish, and I would explain to people that, like, how where we live, we try to grow things. It's like in Guatemala, you can't kill things in the highlands. The most beautiful plants and flowers and fruits grow out of the cracks of the sidewalks, and it's like it's sort of perfect conditions for life, I guess.
And it's, for them, it's sort of taming the jungle. Whereas for us, we cultivate, crops and stuff. They're trying to find space to make, make space for themselves and their families.
Right.
So we have some characters that returned again, Angela and Matt, and I like their interactions with Court. I like the fact that, he sort of has a home base, and I like that. And then we have some new characters in this book, of course, which you always bring in. And so now I'm sort of curious, because you've done a lot of you had a lot in studies, in international studies and stuff. So when I read the Gray Man series, should I be worried about our government and whether it can handle us or not?
Yeah, so this book, of all the villains, you know, there is a larger conspiracy at play here. It's not just the Northern Irishmen coming to settle a
Right.
score. And this larger conspiracy, you know, honestly, obviously, in America, it's a time of mistrust, and you know, one side doesn't trust the other side, and you know, we have questions about our government, or if you support our government, you have questions about the 60% of Americans that have questions about our government. Whatever it is, it's a time of a lot of paranoia. And so when I started working on this book and I was building out this larger, you know, problem that involved the U.S. government, I kind of thought back to like 1970s era conspiracy movies like 3 Days of the Condor or The Parallax View or the Conversation. These different types of films that kind of made you you just brought the hairs up on your arms a little bit and just go like, I don't know, you know, who's listening to me, who's watching me, what their objectives are. In this book, there's an outside threat and an inside threat that are sort of intertwined, and it's a big situation. But I try and keep it pretty grounded because Court works for this very small group called Ghost Town, and their job is to try and stop these 5 assassins who've come in to the country for whatever reason. They're eliminating a certain group of counterintelligence personnel, and so Court and his team are very much focused on an aspect of this conspiracy, but the bigger thing at play was a challenge to write, but also it made me feel like this is, in this day and age, it's kind of like something that people could understand.
I agree, and I am not too big on conspiracy theories. I have a few of my own theories, mind you, which I won't get into on the podcast, but offline I'll tell you. But you know, it's one of those things that I also know that I've lived a very privileged life in the fact that I've never been visited by trauma and terror. So I'm very thankful for that. But I realize there are a lot of people in this country and outside of this country that cannot say that. So I realize that I'm privileged in that regards. I remember one time on my first time coming back from London, there was a bomb on a train in London, or a commuter train. And so all of the transport was halted for like an hour, and I missed my flight home to America. And I remember when I got back to America, some people saying, well, you know, why were you in such a dangerous place? And I think to myself, London's not really dangerous,
right?
But things happen. They happen here in the US and they happen around the world. But as I get a little older, I'm beginning to wonder a little bit about, you know, does one hand know what the other hand is doing anymore? And I just don't know. But then I read your book and I'm like, well, the world doesn't look so bad after all.
Yeah, I've done some of my location travel in places where my friends here are, you know, concerned about where I'm going. And I'm like, come on, guys, we live in Memphis. It's statistically, I think, somewhere between number 1 and number 5 as far as crime in America. And you know, we live safe existences. Now, you know, I always sort of say jokingly and not jokingly, I mean, if I wanted to get in trouble, I know exactly where to go and I can be there in 15 minutes.
Right.
But, you know, sadly, that's the state of things. You know, we are pretty privileged to be where we are. And I did want to bring it home. I mean, in the 15 Gray Man books, this is really only the second one where he spent significant time in the U.S. Usually most of the threats are abroad, but then it's not, I don't want to be one of those American writers who, you know, the foreigners are the problem and the Americans are the solution, because gosh, I've been a student of history, and we've botched things up, and we've started our own problems in many locations, as well as doing a lot of good as well.
That's right. That's right. And I think, you know, that is one of the things about Court that I find so fascinating. I mean, he has a single purpose, and that is to do his job. And he does his job very well, obviously. But he's somebody that you can root for. I mean, he's an assassin, but at the same time, he's doing what I feel like he needs to do. And I think as the author, you have given us a person we can root for, and we see, you know, his shortcomings, but we still want him to win, you know?
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate that. So, yeah, so he has his vulnerabilities, but he does have a moral compass that drives him, and sometimes it doesn't always drive him in the way that maybe the reader wants. Sometimes I can think of a couple examples when I was writing a story, going like, well, this is what the reader will want to see him do, but it doesn't really make sense for the character that I've built him into. So I kind of have to, you know, dance with the one I brought along with me, and do that. And so that's happened a few times, but that's always kind of a fun thing for a writer, because you're going like, okay, you're not just typing here what you think people want to read. You're typing here what makes sense in the world that you built. And you don't really think about that when you started. Well, I didn't think about that when I started the series, but
No.
there became a point in this series where it almost is taking me along a little bit, and I'm learning as it goes.
Well, and also I want to, so I wrote down a little passage that you wrote, because I thought it was just so apt, and it's almost prose, Mark. So if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. And I thought, well, it's something very simple, but it gave me a perfect description of exactly what was going to happen in that moment, because all these problems were nails exposed that had to be hammered down, and there were a lot of them.
Yeah, and if it's assassins or intelligence professionals that are looking at those problems, they're not going to look for a diplomatic solution.
No,
they're not going to look for retreat. You know, they're not going to look for you know, like, let's hug it out type of situation. And so, yeah, you kind of you know, you need those people on the hard edge of the, you know, the pointy end of the spear, but at the same time, you know, you also need people making other decisions as well.
Yes, Mark, people should always choose you as their partner if there's a fight, and not Dan, because I'm not good at it. So I'm not trained at it nor good at it. So
you're good at writing about it. How about that?
There you go. I like that. And I admire that, because I like to read it. Yeah. So the ending you gave us in this book was, oh my gosh, so perfect.
Thank you.
And so I'm not going to spoil that either, even though I'm desperate to, but I love it, because there was a nugget in an earlier chapter that so informed the ending you gave us in this book. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that was just so wonderful, because it was just brilliant, Mark. It really was. It really was.
Thank you for saying that. It's important to me that, to me, my definition of a cliffhanger is when it's sort of, you read 500 pages and you don't get a satisfactory ending. And I would never do that to a reader. I like to solve, or, you know, like, come to a resolution in what we've been talking about the whole time. But I also like to go, and then this, to make okay. And also, me as a writer who does not have the next book figured out, now I've got something to work towards, or something that I know I'm kind of locked in on, and that helps me focus my efforts a little bit, because you know, this book, there's the plot with the larger conspiracy, which you know, isn't completely resolved at the end of this, but there's definitely the main plot, which is Court and Whetstone and their you know, their trials between one another, and that comes to a conclusion. But then, as you say, in the very last page, there's kind of this aha moment where you go, okay, well, I think that's going to lead to something in the future.
Well, and I loved it. I really did. So, and is the drink called a Sedona? Is that the way you pronounce it? The cider or Sedona?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah,
that came out of left field, because
it did come out of left field, because I wrote that a year ago, but I remember that.
Yeah. So it's funny, because I sit and read on the couch, but the phone is next to me and I'm reading on the iPad. So if something comes up, I don't know what it is, I put the book down and start Googling, because I'm curious. I love research like that. So I did look it up, and I thought, oh, wow, that sort of sounds cool. It's an apple cider drink. So.
Right. I did run across that on my travels, and I thought, well, that'd be an interesting thing to put in there.
Well, I'm glad you did. Once again, the book is called The Hard Line. It's by Mark Greaney. It is so wonderful. Highly recommended. Mark, thank you so much for joining me again.
Good to see you again, Dan.
Good to see you as well. Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Out with Dan. You can find more information about this podcast and its host at OutWithDan.com, on Twitter at OutWithDan, and on Instagram and Facebook at GoOutWithDan. This podcast is hosted by Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, and the theme music is provided by bensound.com. Join us again soon for the next episode of Out with Dan.